The date was March 4th, 2026. In the ragged, frozen cathedral of Norway's Lofoten Islands, the sun hung low over the Arctic Circle, casting long, bruised shadows across the peaks of Trollfjord. Below, the dark, icy waters of the Norwegian Sea churned against the cliffs, a reminder that in this part of the world, beauty is always married to danger. Inside a specialized expedition vessel, 13 skiers were finishing their morning coffee, checking their bindings, and adjusting their beacons. They were part of a ski and sail trip, a dream excursion where the mountains meet the sea. To Hannah Hughes, a massage therapist and seasoned mountain biker from Whistler, British Columbia, it was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. But suddenly, the mountain spoke. Within seconds, 13 people were swept into a white void, buried under thousands of tons of suffocating snow. In the next few minutes, this serene landscape would become the site of a struggle for survival that defied all statistical logic. Imagine you are in a place where there is no one to hear you scream, surrounded by a silence so absolute it feels heavy. Imagine the moment the ground beneath your skis turns into a liquid engine of destruction, where gravity becomes your executioner. You are miles from the nearest hospital, and the air in your lungs is running out. This was not a nightmare for Hannah Hughes. This was her reality. For 15 agonizing minutes, the lives of 13 people hung by a literal thread of luck and the frantic scraping of shovels. This is the story of the miracle of the 13, a day when the mountain tried to take everyone, but somehow the mountain failed. The morning began with the kind of routine that precedes a disaster. The group of 13, led by professional guides from Sail Norge, gathered their gear on the deck of the boat. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that bites at the nostrils and reminds you that you are alive. Hannah Hughes looked up at the slopes of Vesterålen, her eyes scanning the white expanse. She wasn't a novice. She lived in Whistler, a place where the mountains are as much a part of life as the air you breathe. She knew how to read the snow. She knew what a level 3 considerable avalanche warning meant. It meant the snow was a loaded gun and the mountain was hair-triggered. As they began their ascent near Trollfjordvatnet, the snow felt wrong beneath her skis. It was heavy, unstable, a slab waiting for an excuse to slide. She raised her concerns with the guide. She pointed to the crown of the slope, questioning the safety of the line. The guide assured her it would be okay. He was the expert, the authority in a red jacket. So, Hannah took a breath, adjusted her pack, and followed the line. It was a stupid decision, the kind of mistake that haunts a survivor for the rest of their days. The ascent was a rhythmic grind of skins sliding over snow and the steady thrum of breathing. The group moved in a staggered line, a colorful snake of Gore-Tex against the blinding white. For an hour, the world was peaceful. The views of the fjords were staggering, a savage beauty that masked the lethality of the terrain. But the silence of the Arctic is never empty. It is a waiting silence. As they transitioned near a steep pitch above the lake, the mountain finally reached its breaking point. There was no thunderous roar at first, just a sickening whoomph, the sound of a massive air pocket collapsing deep within the snowpack. Hannah's partner was the first to see it. He yelled, "Avalanche!" with a primal urgency that froze the blood. Hannah looked up. The entire face of the mountain was moving. It didn't look like snow. It looked like a white ocean, a wall of churning blocks and powder racing toward them at 80 miles per hour. In that split second, Hannah realized she was standing in the path of a monster. She didn't have time to pray. She didn't have time to run. She only had time to think, there is no way I am surviving this. The impact was a physical weight that crushed the air from her chest. The snow grabbed her skis, twisting her legs with a violence that snapped bone and tore ligament. She was swept 200 meters down the slope, a rag doll in a washing machine of ice. The world became a blur of white and gray, a chaotic tumble where up and down ceased to exist. In an avalanche, the snow behaves like a liquid until it stops. The moment the motion ceases, The friction causes the snow to set like concrete. If you are buried, you are encased in a tomb that is stronger than you are. As the slide slowed, Hannah felt the pressure increasing, the weight of the mountain pressing down on her limbs. But then, a flicker of hope. As the world came to a halt, she didn't see darkness. She saw a pale, blue light. Her head was above the surface. She could breathe. She sat there in the sudden, deafening silence, gasping for air that tasted like ice. Her body was screaming. She looked down and saw her ski boot at a sickening angle. She could feel her ankle wobbling inside the plastic shell, a loose hinge where there should have been solid bone. But as she looked around, the horror of the situation truly set in. The slope was empty. The 13 people who had been laughing on the boat were gone. The mountain was a barren field of debris. Slowly, heads began to pop out of the snow. A hand reached up here. A muffled shout echoed there. Most of the group had been partially buried, saved by the sheer luck of the flow. They began to claw their way out, their fingers raw and bleeding as they dug through the frozen chunks. But as the tally began, the realization hit like a second slide. 2 people were missing. This is the moment where survival becomes a race against biology. When a person is fully buried in an avalanche, the clock starts at 15 minutes. After that, the carbon dioxide they exhale builds up in the small air pocket around their face, creating an ice mask that prevents further oxygen intake. They don't just die, they suffocate in a dark, cold silence. The group didn't wait. Despite their own injuries, despite the shock, they switched their beacons to search mode. The rhythmic beep, beep, beep of the devices was the only sound in the valley. They found the first buried skier quickly. He was under 1.5 meters of snow. They shoveled with a desperation that bypassed exhaustion, throwing great heaps of white over their shoulders. When they reached his face, he was blue, unconscious, a ghost in a ski jacket. But as the air hit his lungs, he gasped. He was back. But the second person was still missing. The search area was massive, a debris field that looked like a graveyard of giants. 10 minutes passed, then 12. The hope in the group was evaporating, replaced by the grim certainty that they were digging for a corpse. Hannah Hughes sat on the snow, unable to walk, watching her friends fight for a life she was sure was already lost. Realistically, I was expecting that recovery to be of somebody that was dead, Hannah would later say. The silence of the mountain felt like a tomb. But then, a probe struck something soft. A shovel hit a helmet. They dug like possessed men, their breaths coming in ragged sobs. They pulled him out after nearly 20 minutes under the ice. By all laws of medicine and nature, he should have been gone. But by some miracle, he breathed. He was alive. Injured, broken, and terrified, but alive. The struggle was far from over. They were stranded in the middle of a debris field, surrounded by slopes that could slide again at any moment. Hannah Hughes, unable to stand on her shattered ankle, had to find a way to safety. She began to bum slide, dragging her broken body down the hill toward the center of the frozen lake. Every bump, every jolt of the uneven snow sent a lightning bolt of agony through her leg. But the will to live is a powerful drug. She reached the center of the lake, where the group huddled together, a small island of humanity in a vast, unforgiving wilderness. Then came the sound of salvation. The rhythmic thumping of a SAR Queen rescue helicopter echoed through the fjords. It appeared over the ridge like a chariot from the heavens, its rotors kicking up a storm of spindrift. One by one, the 13 survivors were winched into the belly of the machine. As the helicopter pulled away, Hannah looked down at the mountain that had tried to swallow them. It looked peaceful again, a silent white giant that had given them a warning they would never forget. In the hospital in Norway, the visceral reality of the event began to sink in. Hannah's ankle was a mess of fractures and dislocations. Her ACL was a shredded memory. The physical pain was intense, worsened by the drug-induced nausea of recovery. But the psychological weight was heavier. She spent hours reflecting on the human factor. the subtle pressure to follow a guide, the internal voice that told her it was dangerous, and the regret of not shouting louder. She had been driving on the rims of her endurance, but she had made it. What would you have done if you were in Hannah's boots? Would you have trusted the expert, or would you have turned back? This decision remains controversial in the backcountry community to this day. Was it a miracle of luck, or a testament to the technical precision of their companion rescue? The search for the two buried members was a navigation miracle, a race won by seconds. The Arctic is an unforgiving place for those who underestimate it, but it is also a place that reveals the triumph of human resilience. All 13 people who went up that mountain came back down. That is a statistical anomaly, a gift from a mountain that usually doesn't give anything back. Hannah Hughes shares her story now not for fame, but as a visceral historian of her own trauma. She wants us to know that a glass of clean water and a breath of fresh air are the most precious things in the world. While Hannah continues her long road to recovery in Whistler, her story remains a guide for those who seek adventure in the wild. It reminds us that nature is not cruel, only indifferent. If you appreciate these stories of human endurance and the fragile line between life and death, consider joining our community. And if you want to understand how a similar moment of indecision led to a very different outcome in the mountains, watch our deep dive into the 1996 Everest disaster next. The mountain is waiting. To understand the magnitude of what happened on that Tuesday in March, we have to look at the anatomy of the Lofoten Islands themselves. These are not just mountains. They are jagged teeth of granite rising straight out of the Norwegian Sea, draped in a snowpack that is notoriously temperamental. The maritime climate here creates a layered cake of snow, heavy, wet layers sitting precariously on top of thin, sugary grains known as hoarfrost. On March 4, 2026, the warning level was a Category 3. In the world of backcountry skiing, Category 3 is the most dangerous because it is the deceptive level. It isn't so high that you stay home, but it is high enough that the weight of a single skier can shatter the entire mountainside. Hannah Hughes was not a novice. Living in Whistler, British Columbia, she spent her life surrounded by some of the most formidable peaks in North America. She understood the language of the mountains. She knew the sound of whoomphing, that hollow, terrifying thud when a snow layer collapses beneath your skis. As her group of 13 prepared to ascend the slopes near Trollford, Hannah felt that familiar prickle of unease. She looked at the pitch of the slope, a steep incline that looked like a loaded spring. She approached the lead guide. She voiced her concern. But in the hierarchy of a guided expedition, there is a psychological trap known as expert halo. You trust the person with the badge and the local knowledge. The guide assured her it was safe. Hannah took a breath, adjusted her goggles, and followed the line. It was the last moment of peace she would know for a very long time. The transition from silence to chaos happens in a fraction of a second. There is no roar at first, only a sharp, crystalline snap, like a bone breaking under a blanket. Hannah's partner saw the fracture line ripple across the snow above them like a lightning bolt. He had just enough time to scream, "Avalanche!" before the world liquefied. When a slab avalanche breaks, you aren't just being pushed by snow, you are standing on a floor that has suddenly turned into a rushing river of concrete blocks. Hannah was swept off her feet instantly. She describes the sensation not as falling, but as being processed by a machine. The snow moved her 200 meters down the slope, a distance of 2 football fields, in a matter of seconds. In those seconds, the human brain enters a state of hyper-lucidity. Hannah wasn't screaming, she was calculating. She knew that once the snow stops, it sets like quickcrete. If your limbs are pinned, you are a statue. If your face is covered, you have about 15 minutes of oxygen before your own breath creates an ice mask, a layer of frozen condensation that seals your mouth and nose. She fought to stay on the surface, swimming through the white waves, a desperate ballet against gravity. Then, the movement stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the snow itself. Hannah was lucky. By some staggering fluke of physics, the slide had deposited her with her head above the debris. She could see the gray Norwegian sky. She could breathe. But as she looked around, the horror of the miracle of the 13 began to reveal its true face. The mountainside was scarred, a massive path of dark earth and shattered ice where 13 people had just been standing. Now, there was no one. The silence of the tomb had descended on the Lofoten Islands. Hannah tried to move, but a white-hot spike of pain shot through her leg. Her ankle was dislocated, the bone shunted out of its socket, held in place only by the stiff plastic of her ski boot. She was alone on a shifting graveyard, and the clock for her friends was already ticking. Survival in an avalanche is a game of 900 seconds. If you are buried completely, your chances of survival drop by 30% after 10 minutes. After 20 minutes, you are likely recovery footage for a documentary. Hannah watched as, one by one, heads began to pop out of the snow like ghosts rising from the earth. The group had been swept into a trap, a depression where the snow piles deep. Most of the 13 had been partially buried, a hand here, a boot there. They began to claw themselves out, their fingers raw and bleeding from the frozen crust. But when the head count was finished, the math didn't add up. 2 people were missing. They were under the blue room, the term survivors use for the suffocating darkness beneath the surface. What would you have done in that moment? Your ankle is shattered, your adrenaline is crashing, and you know that 2 of your friends are inhaling snow 1.5 meters below your feet. This is where companion rescue becomes a test of the soul. The survivors didn't wait for a helicopter. They knew the SAR Queen was miles away. They pulled out their beacons, small electronic devices that emit a pulse. They switched them to search mode. The devices began to beep, a frantic digital heartbeat that led them to a patch of nondescript white. They began to probe, driving long metal rods into the debris. Clink. They hit something. Not a rock, not a tree. It was the soft resistance of a human body. The digging was frantic. Avalanche debris isn't soft powder. It is dense, heavy, and packed tight by the friction of the slide. They shoveled until their lungs burned. The first victim they reached was buried nearly 5 feet down. When they cleared the snow from his face, he was blue. His eyes were rolled back. But as the air hit his lungs, he gasped, a ragged, wet sound that meant life. They moved to the second person. He had been under for nearly 20 minutes. Statistically, he was a corpse. But the miracle of the 13 wasn't finished. As they pulled him from the frozen maw of the mountain, he, too, began to breathe. All 13 were accounted for. All 13 were alive. But the danger wasn't over. They were sitting in the run-out zone, a flat area at the base of a lake where any secondary avalanche would settle. The mountain above them was still loaded. Hannah, unable to walk, had to bum slide, crawling on her backside through the freezing slush to reach the center of the frozen lake. Every jolt sent waves of agony through her fractured ankle. They waited in the center of that white void, 13 battered souls shivering in the shadow of the peaks that had tried to swallow them. When the SAR Queen helicopter finally appeared over the ridge, its rotors beating against the cold air, it felt like a hallucination. They were winched up, one by one, leaving the Trollford behind. In the hospital in Norway, and later back home in Whistler, Hannah had time to reflect on the human factor. Why did they go up that day? Why did the guide ignore the warning signs? In the backcountry, we often suffer from social proof, the idea that if a group is doing it, it must be okay. We ignore our gut because we don't want to be the one who ruins the trip. Hannah's story is a visceral reminder that the mountain doesn't care about your permit, your gear, or your guide's reputation. It only cares about physics. She lost her ACL, her ankle was shattered, and she spent months in a haze of pain and recovery. But she walked away with the ultimate prize, the ability to tell the story. The miracle of the 13 remains one of the most improbable survival events in modern mountaineering. To have a group of that size swept 200 meters, with multiple full burials, and result in zero fatalities is a statistical impossibility. It serves as a haunting lesson for every skier, hiker, and adventurer. The silence of the wilderness is beautiful, but it is a silence that can become a tomb in a heartbeat. Hannah Hughes didn't just survive an avalanche. She survived the collapse of her own trust in the expert halo. She reminds us that in the wild, you are your own last line of defense. As the snow continues to fall on the Lofoten Islands, her story stands as a beacon, a warning to listen to the mountain when it speaks, and to listen to your own soul when it tells you to turn back. Would you have spoken up louder if you felt the mountain was about to break? Or would you have followed the line into the white? These are the questions that haunt the survivors of the Trollfjord. They are the questions that keep us alive. The mountain is always there, waiting for the next group, indifferent to their dreams, ready to turn the world upside down in a single, terrifying snap. Hannah Hughes is home now, but a part of her will always be on that frozen lake, listening for the beep of a beacon, waiting for the miracle to happen one more time. This concludes our journey into the harrowing reality of the Lofoten Avalanche. If you've found strength in Hannah's resilience, consider how thin the line is between a routine day and a historical disaster. Every breath is a gift, and every step in the wilderness is a choice. We'll see you in the next story of human endurance, where the stakes are just as high and the margins just as thin. Stay safe and always watch the sky. To understand the gravity of what happened on March 4th, 2026, we have to look at the anatomy of the Lofoten Islands themselves. This is a place where the mountains do not roll. They erupt straight out of the Norwegian Sea, like the jagged teeth of a buried giant. For a backcountry skier, this is the ultimate cathedral, a landscape of deep blue fjords and vertical white couloirs that seem to defy gravity. Hannah Hughes, a massage therapist from Whistler, British Columbia, knew these types of mountains well. She was no stranger to the risks of the backcountry, having spent years navigating the rugged coast mountains of Canada. But Norway is different. The maritime snowpack here is a fickle beast, influenced by the salt air, the brutal Arctic winds, and the constant oscillation of temperatures. The expedition was a ski and sail trip, a high-end adventure where the boat serves as a floating base camp, moving from fjord to find the most pristine, untouched powder. It is the dream of every serious skier. The group consisted of 13 people, a mix of international tourists and professional guides from the company Sail Norge. They were anchored near Trollfjordvatnet, a remote and hauntingly beautiful area in the Vesterålen region. The morning air was crisp, but there was a tension in the atmosphere that the stunning scenery couldn't quite mask. The regional avalanche forecast was sitting at a level 3, which in the technical language of survival is labeled considerable. To a layperson, level 3 sounds like a middle-of-the-road warning, but to an expert, it is the most dangerous rating of all. Why? Because level 1 is safe. Level 5 is so obviously deadly that no one goes out. But level 3 is the tipping point. It is the level where human-triggered avalanches are not just possible, but likely. It is the level where the slopes look inviting, yet hold a hidden, lethal fragility. As the group began their ascent, Hannah felt a knot of unease tightening in her chest. She looked up at the slopes looming above their planned path. She noticed the way the wind had sculpted the snow into pillows and drifts, a clear sign of wind loading. In her years of mountain biking and skiing in Whistler, she had learned to trust her gut. She raised her concerns with the lead guide, pointing toward the overhead hazards. The guide, relying on years of experience in these specific fjords, assured her that the route was safe and that the conditions would hold. This is the moment where the human factor enters the narrative. In survival analysis, we call this expert halo. the tendency to forestall our own survival instincts because we trust the person in charge. Hannah silenced her inner voice and followed the line. It was a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The group was transitioning, a vulnerable moment in backcountry skiing where gear is being adjusted and skins are being removed. They were stretched out in a line, a sequence of 13 human dots against a massive canvas of white. Then, the world broke. It started with a sound that survivors often describe as a whoomph, the sound of a massive air pocket collapsing beneath the weight of the snow. Her partner's voice cut through the mountain silence like a gunshot, screaming the one word every skier fears: Avalanche! Hannah looked up and saw the horizon moving. A massive slab of snow, hundreds of tons of frozen debris, had detached from the slope above. It wasn't a slide, it was a tidal wave. In an instant, the peaceful mountain transformed into a chaotic washing machine of white. The force of an avalanche is hard to comprehend until you are inside it. It doesn't just push you, it hammers you. It strips the skis from your feet and the poles from your hands. Hannah felt herself being swept away, a leaf in a storm, as she was carried 200 meters down the slope. Inside the slide, the light vanishes. You lose all sense of up or down. Your mouth fills with snow, and every time you try to gasp for air, you inhale ice. Hannah's mind went to a very dark, very practical place. She thought, there is no way I am surviving this. She expected the crushing weight to end everything. But then, as suddenly as it had started, the motion stopped. The river of snow solidified instantly, a process called setting that turns soft powder into something with the density of concrete. By some miracle, when the world went still, Hannah realized she could see a faint glimmer of blue. Her head was above the surface. She was buried to her neck, her body pinned by the immense pressure of the debris, but her airway was clear. She could breathe. This is the first miracle of the 13. In most mass burial events, the odds of a single person having their head free are slim. For a group of 13 to be hit by a slide of this magnitude and have their primary narrator survive with a clear airway is a statistical anomaly. As the dust settled, a horrific silence fell over the slope. It was that silence of the tomb we spoke of earlier. Hannah looked around, expecting to see her friends, but the slope was empty. A line of 13 people had simply vanished. Slowly, hands began to poke through the snow. Faces emerged. One by one, members of the group began to extricate themselves. Virtually everyone had been caught. Most had been partially buried, meaning a limb or a head was visible, allowing them to claw their way out. But as the head count began, the reality of the disaster set in. 2 people were missing. In an avalanche, the golden window for survival is 15 minutes. After that, the carbon dioxide you exhale forms an ice mask around your face, suffocating you in your own breath. The group was now in a race against the clock. They weren't just tourists anymore, they were a rescue team. Hannah, still pinned and feeling a sickening wobble in her ankle, watched as the unburied members transitioned into companion rescue mode. They pulled out their beacons, electronic devices that send a pulse through the snow. The beeping of the beacons filled the air, a frantic, rhythmic pulse that signaled the location of the 2 buried men. They were deep, 1.5 meters down. To dig a person out from that depth requires moving nearly a ton of snow. The survivors dug with a desperation fueled by the knowledge that their friends were currently inhaling the last of their oxygen. The first man was located and shoveled out. He was unconscious, his face blue, but as the fresh Arctic air hit his lungs, he gasped and regained consciousness. But the second man was still missing. The minutes were ticking away. 10 minutes. 12 minutes. The group was reaching the limit of human endurance. They found a signal. They began to probe, driving long metal rods into the snow until they felt the soft strike of a human body. They dug like possessed animals. When they finally reached him, he had been under for nearly 20 minutes. Statistically, he should have been dead. The survival rate for a full burial at 20 minutes drops off a cliff. But as they cleared the snow from his face, he was alive. He was injured, traumatized, but he was breathing. This was the core of the miracle of the 13. While the rescue was unfolding on the snow, Hannah had finally managed to pull herself out. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, replaced by a cold, radiating pain. She looked down at her ski boot. Her ankle felt like it was floating, disconnected from the rest of her leg. She didn't know it yet, but she had suffered a fractured and dislocated ankle and a torn ACL. She couldn't walk. She began to bum slide down the debris, dragging her broken limb behind her, trying to reach the center of the frozen lake. The group huddled together on the ice, away from the run-out zones of the surrounding peaks, watching the heights for a secondary slide. The sound of the Sar Queen helicopter was the most beautiful thing Hannah had ever heard. The Norwegian search and rescue teams are among the best in the world, and they arrive with surgical precision. One by one, the 13 survivors were winched into the belly of the beast. As the helicopter lifted off, looking down at the massive scar on the mountain where they had nearly been erased, the magnitude of their luck began to sink in. In the hospital, during the long, drug-induced hours of recovery, Hannah began to process the human factors that led them to that slope. She thought about her gut feeling, the guide's assurance, and the groupthink that had pushed them forward. She realized that survival isn't just about shovels and beacons. It's about the courage to speak up and the wisdom to listen. She shared her story not for fame, but as a cautionary tale. She wanted people to see the visceral reality of the considerable risk. What would you have done? If you were on that slope and your guide, the expert you paid to keep you safe, told you it was okay, would you have turned back alone? Or would you have followed the line, trusting in the expert halo until the mountain proved you wrong? The miracle of the 13 is a testament to the technical skill of companion rescue. But it is also a haunting reminder of how easily we can be led into the mouth of the wolf. Hannah Hughes is home now in Whistler, undergoing surgeries and physical therapy to rebuild her leg. But the mental scars of March 4th will take longer to heal. She still hears the whoomph of the snow. She still feels the weight of the concrete-like debris pressing against her chest. She is a survivor, a visceral historian, of a day that should have ended in a mass casualty report, but ended instead with 13 people breathing the cold air of the fjords. The Lofoten Islands remain as beautiful and as deadly as ever. The snow continues to fall, wind loading the peaks, waiting for the next group of skiers to test their luck. Hannah's story serves as a bridge between the dream of the perfect run and the nightmare of the burial. It reminds us that in the wilderness, there is no such thing as a routine day. There is only the mountain and the thin, fragile line of human resilience that occasionally, by some miracle, refuses to break. As we look at the footage Hannah captured from her hospital bed, her voice cracking with the weight of the experience, we are reminded of the transformation callback. She went to Norway to find the most beautiful mountains in the world. She found them. But she also found the most terrifying reality a human can face. The desert might be a furnace, but the Arctic is a tomb that only opens for those who refuse to stop digging. This is the end of the narrative of Hannah Hughes and the miracle of the 13. It is a story that redefines the limits of hope and the importance of the human factor in survival. If this account of endurance and the hard way of learning has touched you, consider the lessons Hannah wants to impart. Trust your instincts, respect the considerable warning, and never, ever underestimate the power of a group that refuses to give up on its own. The Sar Queen has returned to its base. The snow on Trollford Vatnet has settled. But for 13 people, the world will never look the same again. They are the ones who walked out of the white void. They are the miracle. Would you like me to look into the survival statistics of maritime versus continental snowpacks? Or perhaps detail the specific medical recovery process for high-altitude avalanche trauma.